The foundations of the Byzantine state. The Byzantine state came to life amid the chaos of the 3rd century, a time when the Roman world was on the brink of collapse. Starting in 235, the crisis of the 3rd century hit hard, unleashing a whirlwind of civil wars, foreign invasions, economic downturns, and plagues. Over those rough decades, more than 20 guys claimed the Roman throne, with most barely hanging on for a few months before meeting a pretty violent end. Germanic tribes were crossing the Rhine and Danube rivers, while Persian armies loomed from the east. It felt like the once unified Mediterranean world was destined to break apart, signaling the end of the long Pax Romana. Out of this mess, Diocletian, a soldier with humble beginnings, rose to power. Born to freed slaves, he became emperor in 284 and completely transformed Roman governance. Realizing the empire was way too big for one person to handle, Diocletian introduced the tetrarchy, a system where 4 rulers shared the load. He split the empire into eastern and western halves, each led by an Augustus and a junior Caesar as a backup. Diocletian took the east for himself and teamed up with his buddy Maximian to rule the west. This split recognized the different cultures and lifestyles between the Greek-speaking, urbanized east and the Latin-speaking, more rural west. But Diocletian's reforms didn't stop at politics. He shook up the provinces, separated civil and military power, and made taxation more consistent. He also upgraded the emperor's status from first citizen to a semi-divine figure, adopting fancy court rituals from Persian traditions. His reign laid the groundwork for the Mediterranean world's continued unity. But when he stepped down voluntarily in the early 4th century, civil wars flared up again. Amidst this new chaos, Constantine emerged. After defeating his rivals at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312, he brought the Mediterranean back under his control. His reign was marked by 2 game-changing decisions: embracing Christianity and founding a new capital in the east. Constantine's Edict of Milan in 313 granted legal tolerance to Christianity, which had been spreading for 3 centuries, despite some rough patches. Although he got baptized only on his deathbed, Constantine was a big supporter of the faith. He called together the First Council of Nicaea in 325 to tackle theological disputes, setting a precedent for imperial involvement in church matters that would become a key part of Byzantine governance. Even more significant was his choice to build a new capital on the site of ancient Byzantium. Nestled on the strategic Bosporus Strait, where Europe meets Asia, the city offered both military protection and commercial perks. In 330, Constantinople was officially dedicated as a new Rome, a Christian city filled with churches, monuments, and forums. This new Rome would be the seat of power for over 11 centuries. After Constantine passed away in 337, his successors faced ups and downs with division and reunification. Theodosius I, the last ruler to effectively manage both halves of the empire, split the administration between his sons Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west, upon his death in 395. From there, the 2 halves would follow wildly different paths. The 5th century saw the gradual disintegration of the Western Roman Empire at the hands of Germanic kingdoms. Places like Britain, Spain, Gaul, and North Africa all fell under Germanic control. In 476, the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was ousted, marking the traditional fall of the Western Roman Empire. Meanwhile, in the east, the legacy of antiquity not only survived, but thrived. Protected by the strong walls of Constantinople and blessed with greater wealth, the eastern state we now call Byzantium would last nearly a millennium after the West's collapse. The Byzantines preserved and reshaped classical heritage, creating a unique civilization that blended Roman political systems, Greek culture, and Christian faith. Christianity became the heart of society, and while Western Europe splintered into competing kingdoms, Byzantium held on to the ideal of universal authority. This idea stuck around until Turkish cannons finally broke through Constantinople's walls in 1453, marking the definitive end of the millennial legacy of antiquity after more than 2,000 years. Foundation and Golden Age, 330 to 565. The rise of Byzantium, Constantine's new capital, Constantinople, wasn't just a royal pad. It was a city built to be the heart of Mediterranean civilization. Nestled on a triangular peninsula where Europe meets Asia, it was nearly impossible to take by force and controlled key trade routes. The city was laid out to reflect the old Rome, complete with 7 hills, a new Senate house, forums, and administrative buildings. Constantine jazzed up his city with monuments and statues, many of which had pagan roots, creating a fascinating mix of classical art and a fresh Christian vibe. A massive hippodrome, which could hold a whopping 100,000 spectators, became the buzzing center of public life. One big difference from old Rome was that this new city was all about Christianity. The first cathedral, Hagia Sophia, or Holy Wisdom, was built, although it would be expanded later on. There were no pagan temples in sight, marking a clear break from the past. The rise of Constantinople coincided with a major shift in Christianity, which went from being a persecuted group to the leading faith in the Mediterranean. The Council of Nicaea established the Nicene Creed, declaring Jesus Christ to be of one substance with the Father, which was an early attempt to define Orthodox beliefs with some imperial backing. The Eastern faith started developing distinct regional centers in places like Constantinople, Alexandria, and Antioch, laying the groundwork for what would later be known as Eastern Orthodoxy. Not everyone was on board with Constantine's Christian embrace. His nephew, Julian the Apostate, who ruled from 361 to 363, tried to turn back the clock by restoring traditional worship and promoting Neoplatonism. But sadly for him, he met an untimely end during a campaign against Persia, and his successors quickly went back to supporting Christianity. Soon enough, the empire faced some serious external threats. In 378, Gothic warriors dealt a crushing blow to imperial forces at the Battle of Adrianople, where Emperor Valens lost his life. His successor, Theodosius I, took a different approach by settling large groups of Germanic peoples as allies along the borders. This move offered some temporary relief, but also planted seeds for future troubles. By the late 4th century, there was a noticeable cultural split between East and West, with Greek increasingly taking over daily life in the East. Theodosius I, who ruled from 379 to 395, was the last emperor to oversee both halves of the empire. He was a passionate Christian who banned pagan sacrifices, closed temples, and even put an end to the Olympic Games. Under his rule, Christianity became the official religion. When he passed away, his empire was split between his sons for good. The 5th century brought wildly different fortunes for the two halves. The West fell apart under waves of Germanic migrations and invasions, with cities like Rome being sacked. Meanwhile, the East held its ground, keeping its territories intact and thriving. The impressive Theodosian walls, built in the early 5th century, stood strong against barbarian forces for nearly 1,000 years. The East also kept control of wealthy regions like Egypt and Syria, which helped maintain a solid tax base and robust trade networks. The gold solidus introduced by Constantine brought some monetary stability that the inflation-ridden West could only dream of. As the West crumbled, the Eastern court developed a more elaborate ceremonial style influenced by Persian traditions. The emperor transformed into a distant, semi-divine figure surrounded by strict protocols. This was a big shift from the earlier model of emperors as first citizens, emphasizing the almost superhuman nature of imperial authority. The last Western emperor was deposed in 476, leaving the Eastern court as the sole heir to imperial legitimacy. They viewed the lost Western territories as just a temporary setback, while intellectual and cultural life thrived in the East. A great university was founded in Constantinople in 425, and the Codex Theodosianus, the first systematic compilation of imperial legislation since the 2nd century, was established. By the late 5th century, a unique Eastern identity had formed, blending Roman political structures, Greek culture, and Orthodox religious practices. The emperor now had a dual role, a secular leader in the classical sense, and Christ's a viceroy on earth, responsible for the spiritual well-being of his subjects. The Age of Justinian, 527 to 565. The early 6th century kicked off a new dynasty with Justin I, a former soldier, taking the throne. But the real game-changer of this era was his nephew Justinian I, who became emperor in 527. Born in a little Balkan village, Justinian got his education in Constantinople. He married Theodora, a former actress and courtesan, which raised some eyebrows, but honestly, it turned out to be a brilliant move. Theodora was sharp, politically savvy, and fiercely determined. She became Justinian's most trusted advisor. Thanks to her, women gained expanded legal rights, and actresses and prostitutes got some much-needed protections. Just 5 years into their reign, the couple faced a massive crisis. In 532, the Nika riots erupted in Constantinople. What started as some sports rivalry between the Blues and Greens turned into a huge uprising against the government. For 5 days, rioters took over the streets, burning down much of the city, including the original Hagia Sophia. Justinian thought about fleeing on escape ships, but Theodora famously declared, "Purple makes a fine burial shroud." Her bravery pushed him to stay and fight. With General Belisarius leading the way, imperial troops cornered and took down thousands of rioters in the Hippodrome, crushing the revolt. After the riots, the city was rebuilt with some of its most stunning monuments. Justinian commissioned a brand new Hagia Sophia, which was completed in just 5 years. This architectural wonder featured a dome that was 108 feet wide and soared 180 feet high, making it look like it was suspended from heaven by a golden chain. Along with this cathedral, Justinian built churches, hospitals, and aqueducts, showcasing his ambitious vision for the empire. One of Justinian's most lasting achievements was his legal reform. He set up a commission led by the Juris Tribonian to gather and codify all existing laws. The result? The Corpus Juris Civilis, body of civil law, which included 4 parts: the Code, the Digest, the Institutes, and the Novels. This monumental work preserved 1,000 years of legal development and laid the groundwork for most European legal systems, still influencing modern civil law today. Justinian had his sights set on reconquering the lost western provinces. In 533, Belisarius led a successful expedition against the Vandal kingdom in North Africa, bringing the region back under Eastern control. Riding high on this victory, Justinian sent Belisarius to reclaim Italy from the Ostrogoths. This turned into a brutal 2-decade-long struggle that left the Italian peninsula in ruins. By 554, Eastern forces had secured Italy, and a separate campaign even reclaimed part of southern Spain from the Visigoths. For a brief moment, the Mediterranean seemed to regain its ancient unity, with the empire's borders stretching from Spain to the Euphrates. But these conquests came at a cost. The military stretched thin, especially with the powerful Sassanid Persian state posing the threat on the eastern front. Under King Khosrow I, the Persians launched repeated invasions, even sacking the great city of Antioch in 540. To keep the peace, the Byzantine court had to pay hefty tributes. As if military struggles weren't enough, the Justinian plague swept through the Mediterranean, starting in 541. This devastating pandemic killed an estimated 25 to 50 million people, making it super tough for the empire to bounce back. Tax revenues dropped, farms faced labor shortages, and military recruitment became a real challenge. Despite all these overwhelming obstacles, Justinian held on to his ambitious vision until his death in 565. He left behind a transformed Mediterranean world with a revamped legal system and the architectural marvel of Hagia Sophia. But the state was financially drained, weakened by the plague, and stretched too thin militarily. Those Western reconquests would be short-lived, and within a century, most of those territories would slip away again. Still, Justinian's reign marked the last great flourish of ancient Mediterranean civilization before everything changed. Survival, strife, and renewal 565-1025. Crises and transformation. Justinian's death in 565 marked a big shift in history. His successor, Justin II, took over an empire that was larger, but in pretty rough shape. The treasury was empty, provinces were depopulated, and military forces were stretched thin. It didn't take long for the carefully built unity to start falling apart. In Italy, the Lombards invaded and grabbed a huge chunk of the northern peninsula. Meanwhile, in the Balkans, Slavic and Avar groups moved in, settling in lands that had been under Roman control for ages. Over on the eastern frontier, things heated up with Persia, as Khosrow II launched some seriously damaging attacks. By 614, the Persians had taken Jerusalem and snagged the True Cross, and by 618, they had conquered Egypt, which was crucial for feeding Constantinople. Amid all this chaos, Heraclius stepped onto the scene. After kicking out the useless Emperor Phocas in 610, he rolled out major reforms, reorganizing the remaining territories into military districts called themes. Soldiers got land grants in exchange for military service, creating a system that would defend the empire for ages. Heraclius then launched a desperate counteroffensive against Persia, culminating in a stunning win at the Battle of Nineveh in 627. By 630, all the lost territories were back in Byzantine hands. But this victory didn't last long. A new power was rising from the Arabian desert, united by the Prophet Muhammad. Muslim armies surged into the Levant, and the Byzantine state, worn out from its battles with Persia, wasn't ready for this new threat. Byzantine forces faced a crushing defeat at the Battle of Yarmouk in 636, and by 642 they had permanently lost the rich provinces of Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. These huge territorial losses changed Byzantine society forever. The empire shrank down to a much smaller area, focused on Asia Minor, the Aegean, and the southern Balkans. It became more Greek in culture and Orthodox in faith. During Heraclius's reign, Greek finally took over as the official language of administration, replacing Latin. The empire faced a serious challenge from Muslim forces. Between 674 and 678, they launched a massive attack on Constantinople itself, which was fended off using Greek fire, a mysterious substance that could burn on water. The city's defenses held strong again in 717-718, when they repelled another huge Muslim siege led by Leo III. This victory marked a peak for early Muslim expansion, and the boundary between the two powers stabilized along the Taurus Mountains. As Byzantine society fought to stay afloat, its internal beliefs faced a tough test. In 726, Leo III issued an edict against sacred images, kicking off a period known as iconoclasm, or image breaking. This debate revolved around whether Christ's divine nature could be shown in physical form. For over a century, the Byzantine world was torn apart by this issue, with icons being destroyed, restored, and banned over and over. Iconoclasm finally wrapped up in 843 with the return of image veneration, a moment still celebrated in Orthodox churches as the triumph of orthodoxy. The relationship with Rome became increasingly strained during this time. When the Lombards threatened Rome in the mid-8th century, the popes turned to the Frankish king Pepin for help instead of Constantinople. This alliance led to Pepin's son, Charlemagne, being crowned as Emperor of the Romans on Christmas Day in 800, which directly challenged the Byzantine claim of being the true continuation of ancient Roman authority. Despite all these challenges, the smaller Byzantine heartland showed some serious resilience. The theme system worked well, and under the Macedonian dynasty starting in 867, the empire began to recover its territory. A cultural and intellectual revival, known as the Macedonian Renaissance, saw ancient Greek texts being copied and studied with fresh enthusiasm. The legal system got a makeover with the Basilica, which organized Justinian's legal work and translated it from Latin to Greek. The economy also bounced back, with the gold numisma keeping its weight and purity for centuries. By the late 9th century, Byzantine society had weathered its crisis and emerged stronger than ever. Iconoclasm and religious upheaval. The debate over sacred images, known as iconoclasm, was a major crisis for Byzantine society during this time. It stemmed from deep theological questions about who Christ was and how to honor holy figures without crossing into idolatry. It all kicked off in 726 when Leo III, who bravely defended Constantinople from Muslim attacks, issued an edict against sacred images. Scholars still debate his reasons, but this move sparked immediate backlash, especially from monastic communities. Things heated up under his son, Constantine V, who ramped up iconoclasm and argued that any physical representation of Christ was a theological mistake. The enforcement of these policies was often harsh, with icons being destroyed and monks, who were the main supporters of these images, facing persecution. Meanwhile, theologians like John of Damascus, living under Muslim rule, crafted strong defenses for image veneration, saying that Christ's incarnation made material representations valid. The first phase of iconoclasm wrapped up in 787, when Empress Irene called together the Seventh Ecumenical Council at Nicaea, which brought back the veneration of images. But the issue didn't just disappear. It remained a hot topic. In 815, Leo V brought back iconoclasm, starting a second wave of image destruction. The controversy finally settled in 843, when Empress Theodora officially restored the veneration of images, marking a moment celebrated as the triumph of orthodoxy. The iconoclast dispute left a lasting impact on Byzantine worship practices. When image veneration returned, clear guidelines emerged for creating sacred art, leading to more standardized icons. This conflict also highlighted the growing divide between Byzantine and Western Christian traditions. Rome consistently opposed iconoclasm, showcasing different views on the relationship between church and state. This era also witnessed other important spiritual developments. In 863, the brothers Cyril and Methodius were sent from Constantinople to the Slavic lands, where they created the Glagolitic alphabet to write Slavic languages. Their missionary efforts laid the groundwork for many Slavic peoples to embrace Orthodox Christianity. At the same time, relations with Rome were getting worse. The addition of the word filioque, and from the Son, to the Western version of the Nicene Creed became a major sticking point. The Phocian Schism of the 860s, where Patriarch Photius of Constantinople and Pope Nicholas I of Rome excommunicated each other, hinted at the formal schism that would come in 1054. By the end of the 9th century, the Byzantine world had developed unique spiritual traits that would last for centuries. A rich tradition of icon veneration, a close-knit church-state relationship, advanced theological discussions, and a growing rift from Western practices. Administrative and military reform. The challenges faced during the 7th and 8th centuries pushed Byzantine society to undergo some serious changes. One of the biggest innovations was the theme system, which completely revamped how the military and civil administration worked. This system split the remaining territories into military administrative districts, each led by a strategos, general, who had both civil and military authority. This practical setup turned the earlier separation of powers by Diocletian and Constantine on its head. In this theme system, soldiers were granted land in exchange for hereditary military service, creating a unique class of farmer soldiers. This arrangement tackled urgent financial and manpower shortages while ensuring that defenders had a personal stake in the lands they were protecting. The earliest themes popped up in Asia Minor, where remnants of field armies from lost provinces were stationed. As the system matured, these themes were divided further, and by the late 9th century, there were around 25 of them. The theme system turned out to be super effective, providing a layered defense against Muslim incursions. It also reshaped Byzantine society by forming a class of free peasant soldiers, which helped maintain elements of the ancient Mediterranean social order, especially as Western Europe was drifting toward feudalism and serfdom. On top of that, the Tagmana, which were central field armies based in and around Constantinople, complemented the theme forces. These elite regiments acted as a professional striking force for offensive operations and balanced out the power of the provincial theme armies. Naval defense saw a similar overhaul, with maritime themes established in coastal areas. By the 9th century, The Byzantine fleet had regained its stronghold in the Aegean and much of the eastern Mediterranean. A theme system really hit its stride during the Macedonian dynasty. Under Basil I and his successors, the empire experienced significant territorial expansion and internal consolidation. The legal system was updated with the basilica, and the empire's gold coinage, the nomisma, maintained its consistent weight and purity for centuries. This monetary stability made the nomisma the go-to currency throughout the Mediterranean. Economic revival came hand in hand with institutional recovery. The Book of the Prefect, a 10th century manual, laid out strict regulations for markets, crafts, and commerce in Constantinople. Byzantine lands held a key position between the Islamic world and Western Europe, paving the way for a profitable exchange of goods. The silk industry, a closely guarded state monopoly since Justinian's era, churned out valuable textiles for trade and diplomatic gifts. By the 10th century, the Byzantine world had bounced back from its crisis, emerging stronger, wealthier, and more formidable than ever. This remarkable adaptability is a standout example of how institutions can survive and reinvent themselves through tough times. Apex, Decline, and Western Entanglement, 1025-1204. As the first millennium wrapped up, the Eastern Mediterranean hit its medieval high point under Basil II, a truly formidable and laser-focused leader. Born into royalty, his journey to power wasn't easy. He was just 5 years old when his father passed away. He faced some pretty intense civil wars early on, which shaped him into a strict, disciplined, and dedicated administrator. Basil II's biggest challenge came from the Bulgarian Empire, ruled by the ambitious Samuel. He launched a careful 30-year campaign against the Bulgarians, which peaked with the Battle of Cleidion in 1014. After that victory, he had 14,000 captured Bulgarian warriors blinded, leaving just one man in every 100 with a single eye to guide the others home. This chilling act earned him the nickname Bulgar Slayer and effectively crushed Bulgarian resistance. By 1018, he had annexed the entire Bulgarian realm, securing the Balkan Peninsula and its rich agricultural lands for Constantinople. With his northern border secure, Basil II shifted his focus eastward, expanding Byzantine influence into the Caucasus region. But it wasn't just about military might. He was also a savvy administrator. He kept a tight grip on the bureaucracy, personally reviewing financial accounts and provincial reports. Basil was especially cautious about the growing power of wealthy landowning families who posed a threat to both peasant holdings and central authority. The gold nomisma maintained its weight and purity, and tax collection was running at peak efficiency. When Basil II died in 1025, he left behind an incredible treasury surplus of 200,000 pounds of gold. This long reign marked the height of Byzantine power, but beneath this impressive surface were some serious structural weaknesses. The theme system had gradually faded away, replaced by professional mercenary forces. The concentration of property among aristocratic families continued, undermining the social fabric of the state. Plus, commercial concessions given to Italian maritime republics, especially Venice, set a precedent that would eventually weaken local commerce and create risky economic dependencies. The death of Basil II, who was unmarried and childless, kicked off a rapid decline. The throne passed to his brother, Constantine the Great, a rather lazy figure who started a trend of promoting court favorites over seasoned administrators. His death without male heirs in 1028 triggered a succession crisis that threw the court into chaos for years. This political instability coincided with new external threats. Seljuk Turkic peoples began moving into eastern Anatolia, while Norman adventurers carved out their own independent territories in southern Italy. The fiscal discipline established by Basil II crumbled under the following regimes. The massive treasury surplus quickly vanished, and the gold numisma was debased, shaking confidence in the currency that had been the Mediterranean standard for ages. The theme system kept deteriorating as aristocratic landowners consolidated their holdings, squeezing out independent farmers. The peak of these troubling trends hit in 1071, a year marked by disastrous defeats on two fronts. In April, Norman forces captured Bari, the last Byzantine stronghold in Italy. Even worse, in August, Seljuk forces crushed the main imperial army at the Battle of Manzikert, where Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes was captured. The defeat at Manzikert, while not an immediate disaster, had catastrophic consequences. The overthrow and blinding of Romanos IV led to a brutal civil war, with rival claimants for the throne seeking Seljuk support, which invited Turkish forces into Anatolia as mercenaries. Turkish migration sped up in this chaotic situation, and by 1081, much of Anatolia had been lost. The Seljuk Turks established the Sultanate of Rum, centered in Nicaea, just under 100 miles from Constantinople. To make matters worse, long-standing tensions between the Patriarchate of Constantinople and Rome boiled over in 1054, leading to mutual excommunications. This great schism marked the official split between Orthodox and Catholic traditions, complicating potential alliances with Western powers just when the empire faced unprecedented threats. A remarkable recovery through innovation amid a wave of challenges. A truly adaptable and resilient leader stepped up, Alexios I Komnenos. This talented commander, hailing from the aristocratic martial community, took charge in 1081 with the support of the army and nobility. He faced a nearly impossible situation. The Seljuk Turks had taken over most of Anatolia. Norman forces were eyeing the Balkans. The treasury was empty, and the administrative structures were in disarray. Alexios jumped into action with some smart, innovative reforms. On the military front, he ditched the old theme system and introduced the pronoia system. This new approach allowed aristocratic families to receive land revenues in exchange for providing equipped mounted warriors. It formalized the martial leadership that was already emerging and directed noble ambitions to serve the throne. His fiscal reforms were equally groundbreaking. With a drained treasury and a shaky currency, Alexios rolled out new gold and electrum coins. He even controversially confiscated church property to tackle immediate financial needs, which helped secure essential resources for defense. On the administrative side, Alexios centralized authority within his extended family, bringing much-needed stability after years of factional fighting. He also showed impressive diplomatic skills, forming alliances with other nomadic groups to neutralize the Pecheneg threat and granting trading privileges to Venetian merchants in exchange for naval support against the Normans. Most importantly, he reached out to Western Christendom for military help against the Turkish encroachment in Anatolia. In 1095, Alexios sent envoys to Pope Urban II, asking for hired forces to help reclaim lost territories in Anatolia. This request sparked the First Crusade, a massive movement of Western warriors driven by religious fervor. When the Crusaders arrived in Constantinople in 1096 to 1097, Alexios faced the unprecedented challenge of managing this powerful but unpredictable ally. He secured oaths from the Western princes to return any former Byzantine territories they conquered. The initial cooperation was a success. When the Crusaders captured Nicaea in 1097, they handed it over to Byzantine control, removing a major Turkish threat. As Western armies advanced eastward, Byzantine forces worked to reclaim coastal territories in Western Asia Minor, starting to reverse the devastating losses from the post-Manzikert years. The recovery continued under Alexius's son, John II Komnenos, ruled 1118 to 1143, who built on his father's legacy with steady effectiveness. Systematic campaigns against Turkish positions in Anatolia reclaimed even more territory, and Byzantine authority was re-established in Cilicia and northern Syria. The third Komnenian ruler, Manuel I Komnenos, ruled 1143 to 1180, represented both the height and the limits of this restoration. Educated and ambitious, with a Western outlook, he pursued an expansive foreign policy, intervening in Hungarian affairs and seeking alliances with Western powers. The Komnenian Restoration was all about pragmatic adaptation rather than longing for the past. The old theme armies weren't brought back. Instead, new military structures based on pronoia grants and mercenaries were formed. The focus was on defensible frontiers and strategic positions rather than trying to reclaim ancient territories. This flexibility allowed for a significant recovery, but beneath the impressive rebuilding lay ongoing vulnerabilities. The concentration of power within a single household posed potential succession issues, and the commercial privileges given to Italian maritime republics undercut local merchants. The limits of this restoration became painfully clear after Manuel I's death in 1180. Internal strife, including bloody purges of Latin residents in Constantinople in 1182, coincided with rising external threats from the Normans and Venetians. The following Angeli dynasty proved disastrously incompetent, wasting the gains of the Restoration in just 2 decades. By 1203, the once mighty state was seen by its commercial rivals and Western powers as ripe for conquest. This set the stage for the Fourth Crusade and the fall of Constantinople. By the early 13th century, the Byzantine Empire was in a tough spot. The Angeli dynasty was doing a pretty lousy job, and things were falling apart. Money was losing its value, local governance was a mess, and the military was underpaid and just not effective. On top of that, foreign policy blunders piled up, especially with all the privileges handed out to Italian merchants from Venice, Pisa, and Genoa. These foreign enclaves operated under their own rules, paid minimal taxes, and totally dominated trade, which created a lot of resentment among locals. Then came Alexios IV Angelos, a young guy with a claim to the throne. In 1201, he bolted from Constantinople and sought help from the leaders of the Fourth Crusade, promising them a boatload of rewards to help him get his dad, Isaac II, back on the throne. He promised 200,000 silver marks, military support, and even said he'd submit the Eastern Church to the Pope. The Fourth Crusade was originally aimed at Egypt, but was already running low on funds. The crafty Doge Enrico Dandolo of Venice saw a chance in Alexius's desperation. He redirected the expedition to Zara, a Christian city Venice wanted back, and then set his sights on Constantinople. By June 1203, a powerful fleet appeared at the city's gates. After the emperor fled, Isaac II and Alexios IV were put back in power, but they couldn't deliver on their big promises. This led to a surge in anti-foreign sentiment, and by January 1204, a popular uprising took Alexios IV down, ending in his murder. This chaos gave the Crusaders the perfect excuse for what many had likely been thinking all along. On April 12, 1204, the walls of Constantinople, which had stood strong for 9 centuries, were finally breached. For 3 days, the beautiful city faced relentless looting. Holy buildings were desecrated, palaces were stripped, and priceless artworks were either destroyed or melted down for their metals. The iconic Hagia Sophia witnessed some shocking acts of sacrilege. But it wasn't just about the looting. It was a massive cultural disaster. Constantinople had been the greatest center of ancient knowledge, housing countless manuscripts on philosophy, science, history, and literature that had vanished in Western Europe. Many of these irreplaceable works were lost or scattered during the chaos. Sacred artifacts, including pieces of the True Cross and remains of apostles, were systematically looted and sent westward. The human cost was staggering, with thousands of residents either killed or enslaved, causing the city's population to drop dramatically. After the violent takeover, the Crusaders set up the Latin Empire of Constantinople. Western nobles were given lands as fiefs, creating principalities like the Duchy of Athens and the Principality of Achaia. The city itself underwent a major transformation, with Venetian merchants taking control of key harbor facilities and Western church authorities replacing local clerics. For the Eastern world, this was a huge spiritual crisis. How could divine providence allow foreigners to violate their holiest city? This event shattered the long-held belief in heavenly protection that had been a cornerstone of Byzantine identity for centuries. However, the fall of Constantinople didn't mean the end of the Byzantine legacy. 3 main successor centers popped up, each claiming to carry on the ancient heritage. In Western Asia Minor, an administration formed around Theodore I Lascaris, who was the son-in-law of the former emperor. In Epirus, along the Adriatic coast, Michael I Komnenos Doukas set up an independent domain. And in far-off Trebizond, Alexios and David Komnenos, grandsons of a previous emperor, created a 3rd center of Byzantine governance. Among these centers, the Empire of Nicaea, founded by Theodore Lascaris, quickly became the most powerful. Its close proximity to the fallen capital and control over fertile lands gave it an edge over its rivals. Lascaris and his successor, John III Doukas Vatatzes, were effective leaders who consolidated their power, expanded their territories, and reformed agricultural production. Despite their challenges, Byzantine cultural life adapted to their new reality. The court in Nicaea positioned itself as the protector of tradition and classical heritage. Scholars found support and protection, establishing schools that preserved ancient knowledge. The Orthodox Church, with its relocated patriarch, became a unifying force amid the political chaos. Meanwhile, conditions in the Latin-occupied territories worsened. The feudal systems imposed by the Western conquerors didn't fit the Eastern social and economic realities. The occupation government faced constant financial struggles and a lack of military manpower. This instability opened the door for restoration. In 1261, a general from the Nicene court, Alexios Strategopoulos, discovered that Constantinople was mostly undefended. With most of the occupation forces busy with a naval expedition, he seized the moment and entered through an unguarded gate, aided by local residents. The Latin emperor fled without a fight, bringing an end to Western rule after nearly 60 years. The recapture of the Queen of Cities was a huge victory, but the city that Michael VIII Palaiologos, the new emperor, entered looked nothing like its former self. The population had dropped significantly, and many iconic buildings lay in ruins. Italian merchants controlled the commercial networks, and the restored administration only managed a fraction of its previous territories. Michael VIII faced the daunting task of rebuilding a functional state from the wreckage. He focused on urban renewal, diplomatic efforts, and creative financing, including the controversial debasement of coinage and commercial deals with Italian cities like Genoa. He also faced challenges with religious policies, as he sought a controversial union with the Roman Catholic Church at the Council of Lyon in 1274 to counter Western threats. While this union achieved some diplomatic goals, it sparked fierce backlash within Byzantine society. Despite these significant hurdles, the restored administration under the Palaiologos dynasty managed to re-establish legitimate rule in the ancient capital and piece together a functioning state from the remnants of exile. Twilight and Fall, 1261 to 1453. The recapture of Constantinople in 1261 was a big win, but it also revealed some serious weaknesses that would shape the last centuries of the Byzantine Empire. Honestly, the restored state was just a shadow of its glorious past, controlling only a tiny portion of its former lands. It found itself surrounded by rivals, like the Serbian and Bulgarian principalities in the Balkans, Anatolian beyliks across the straits, and Italian commercial interests all over the Mediterranean. The Palaiologos dynasty had its hands full with challenges. Restoring the city's infrastructure and monuments required resources that a shrunken society just couldn't afford. The population had dwindled to a fraction of what it once was, and economic opportunities had permanently shifted. Italian maritime powers, especially Venice and Genoa, were now ruling the sea lanes and commercial networks, leaving the empire both financially and militarily weak. The remaining territories in Asia Minor were slowly being lost to Turkic advances, and by the early 14th century, the empire had shrunk to little more than the area around Constantinople and some scattered holdings in Greece. Fiscal issues were a constant headache. Tax revenues just weren't cutting it, and successive rulers ended up debasing the currency. This financial mess created a vicious cycle. Not enough revenue meant they couldn't maintain a strong military, which led to losing more territory, and that, in turn, shrank the tax base even further. But here's the twist. Despite all these struggles, this period also saw some amazing cultural achievements, known as the Palaiologos Renaissance. Scholars, theologians, and artists produced works that still matter today, preserving classical and spiritual traditions, even while political fortunes were fading. Monasteries kept ancient texts safe, and masterpieces of architecture and art were created, like the stunning mosaics and frescoes in the Cora Church. However, internal political fragmentation only added to the empire's woes. The Palaiologos succession system was pretty unstable, leading to repeated and destructive civil wars that drained the treasury and allowed neighboring powers to snatch up more territory. The brutal 6-year civil war in the 1340s was particularly damaging. This internal chaos coincided with two major disasters. In 1347, the Black Death hit Constantinople, wiping out maybe a third of its already reduced population. At the same time, a formidable new competitor emerged across the straits in Anatolia, the Ottoman state. Founded by Osman around 1300, the Ottomans stood out with their effective military organization and practical governance. Under Osman's son, Orhan, they expanded quickly, establishing a foothold in Europe by 1354. Then, under Orhan's successor, Murad I, they captured Adrianople and made it their European headquarters. By the 1370s, the Byzantine Empire was almost completely surrounded. Desperate for help, the Byzantine court tried all sorts of diplomatic solutions, from appeasement to alliances and appeals to Latin Europe. Successive emperors acknowledged Ottoman suzerainty and paid tribute. Appeals to Rome for military assistance didn't yield much. There was a brief glimmer of hope in 1402 when the Central Asian conqueror Timur defeated and captured Sultan Bayezid I at the Battle of Ankara, triggering a succession crisis that temporarily halted Ottoman expansion. But that hope was short-lived. By the 1420s, Murad II had solidified his power and resumed his expansionist plans. A final attempt to secure Western assistance led to the Council of Florence in 1439, where a delegation led by John VIII Palaiologos negotiated a controversial ecclesiastical union with Rome. This deal stirred up fierce opposition back in Constantinople. A famous saying from a court official summed it up: "Better the Sultan's turban than the cardinal's hat," reflecting the widespread belief that Catholic domination was a bigger threat than Ottoman conquest. In 1451, Mehmed II took the throne at just 19 years old, with big dreams of conquering Constantinople to make his mark in history. He jumped right into preparations for the final showdown, building a massive fortress, Rumeli Hizari, on the European side of the Bosporus to control maritime traffic, and commissioning huge siege cannons from a Hungarian engineer. The last emperor, Constantine the XI Palaiologos, fought hard to strengthen the city's defenses, but the resource gap was glaring. The besieging forces, numbering around 80,000, faced a garrison of only 7,000 defenders. Despite these overwhelming odds, the ancient Theodosian walls still provided formidable protection. The final hours of an ancient legacy. The final showdown between the rising Ottoman Empire and the fading Byzantine legacy kicked off on April 6, 1453. Mehmed II's forces fully surrounded Constantinople, and the massive siege cannons unleashed a bombardment like nothing seen before in medieval warfare. The defenders, led by Emperor Constantine the XI and the Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, fought valiantly, but they were up against the harsh reality of attrition. A game-changing moment happened on April 22 when an Italian relief flotilla managed to break through the naval blockade. In response, Mehmed II came up with a bold plan. His engineers built a wooden trackway to bypass the defensive chain across the Golden Horn. They moved about 70 vessels on rollers and relaunched them into the Golden Horn, outflanking the defenders and forcing them to stretch their already limited manpower. After nearly 8 weeks of siege, the ancient fortifications were crumbling in key areas. Mehmed geared up for the final assault, which kicked off after midnight on May 29th. The attack came in waves, with the elite Janissary corps held back for the critical moment. Near dawn, a small postern gate, the Kokopora, was accidentally left unlocked, allowing a group of Janissaries to slip through between the inner and outer walls. At the same time, Giustiniani, who was in charge of the most vulnerable section, got seriously wounded and had to pull back, causing chaos and lowering morale. The attackers focused on this weak spot, and organized resistance quickly fell apart. Constantine the XI, choosing not to escape, fought bravely alongside his remaining troops. Sadly, his body was never found. By midday, Constantinople had fallen. The city went through 3 days of looting, though it was cut short to just one. Thousands lost their lives, and many more were enslaved. Sacred buildings, including the magnificent Hagia Sophia, were desecrated. Later that day, Mehmed II entered the captured city and headed straight for Hagia Sophia. There, he ordered an immediate stop to the looting and declared the structure a mosque. This clever move established Mehmed as both a conqueror and a preserver, claiming the city's legacy while changing its very essence. Unlike the earlier occupation in 1204, Mehmed aimed for the permanent integration of the site into his expanding empire, seeing it as his new capital. For Byzantine civilization, this moment marked a clear end. No successor state emerged to keep the traditions of governance and cultural continuity alive. The last independent remnants, the Despotate of the Morea and the Empire of Trebizond, fell in 1460 and 1461, respectively. The resulting human and cultural diaspora was significant. Scholars, artists, and manuscripts flowed westward, especially to Italy, greatly contributing to the Renaissance. This intellectual migration brought classical Greek texts and their knowledgeable interpreters right into Western European cultural circles. The spiritual legacy continued in various forms. The Patriarchate gained recognition under Ottoman rule, creating administrative structures to govern Orthodox communities. Meanwhile, Russian Orthodoxy thrived, with Moscow claiming the title of the Third Rome. The importance of 1453 goes beyond just ending a political entity. It marked a shift from the medieval to the early modern historical periods. The fall wiped out the last significant remnant of the ancient Roman imperial structure that had influenced Mediterranean civilization for nearly 2 millennia. At the same time, it signaled the rise of the Ottoman Empire as a major European power. The crucial role of massive artillery in breaking through the ancient defenses symbolized the evolution of warfare beyond medieval methods. Most importantly, this tragic conclusion represented the final act of classical Mediterranean continuity. For 1,123 years, since Constantine dedicated his new capital in 330, Byzantine society had maintained a strong link to ancient Roman imperial structures. The ultimate fall severed this living connection to antiquity while also passing its legacy into new contexts, shaping the emerging modern civilizations. The legacy of Byzantium. Although the Byzantine political structure crumbled in 1453, its influence continued to radiate outward, shaping the development of numerous cultures and traditions across multiple continents. The diaspora of learned individuals who fled westward was a major contributor to the Renaissance. Scholars carrying precious manuscripts found welcome in Italian centers of learning, where their knowledge of classical Greek texts proved invaluable to humanists. Figures like Cardinal Bessarion established important collections that preserved ancient wisdom. This transfer of classical knowledge helped fuel the intellectual revolution that transformed European thought, art, and aesthetics. The distinctive styles of manuscript illumination, mosaic decoration, and icon painting also influenced Italian artists during the formative periods of Renaissance development. The legal heritage of Byzantium proved similarly influential. Justinian's comprehensive legal compilations had already shaped medieval European jurisprudence, and the continued preservation of Roman law principles provided intellectual foundations for developing nation-states as they constructed more sophisticated governance systems. Architectural influence manifested most visibly in religious buildings. The distinctive central dome construction, pioneered in Hagia Sophia, inspired countless structures throughout Orthodox lands, particularly in Russia, where the onion domes of Moscow became synonymous with the city's skyline. Renaissance architects also studied Byzantine methods of dome construction, with Brunelleschi's magnificent cupola for Florence's cathedral drawing on these precedents. The legacy also extended to military and defensive technologies. The elaborate defensive systems that had protected Constantinople for centuries provided models for fortifications throughout the Mediterranean. Engineers trained in Byzantine traditions found employment designing defenses for cities like Venice and Rhodes. The Byzantine naval architectural techniques and shipbuilding methods similarly influenced developing European powers. Commercially, the networks established during centuries of Byzantine predominance continued functioning under new management. Trade routes connecting Europe with Asia, perfected by Byzantine merchants, remained active pathways of exchange. The gold standard established by Constantine provided a model for monetary stability that later European systems would emulate. Perhaps most profoundly, spiritual and religious traditions continued. The Orthodox Church, though politically decapitated, maintained its distinctive theological approaches and liturgical practices. Under Ottoman rule, the Patriarchate continued to function through the millet system, which granted religious communities substantial autonomy. Russian Orthodoxy, meanwhile, flourished as Moscow positioned itself as the Third Rome, claiming to be the legitimate heir to Constantinople's spiritual authority. The ultimate significance of this vanished civilization lies in its role as a preserver and transmitter of ancient knowledge. While Western Europe underwent dramatic transformation after the 5th century, the Byzantine Empire maintained institutional, intellectual, and cultural continuity with the classical world. Without this preservation of Roman legal concepts, Greek philosophical texts, and artistic traditions, much of classical civilization might have perished entirely. The Byzantine Empire was a remarkable case study in cultural adaptation, blending Roman governance, Greek language, and Christian religious practice into a unique composite tradition. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 demonstrates both the fragility and durability of human cultural achievements. Political structures that had endured for over a millennium could collapse under sufficient pressure. Yet, the cultural, intellectual, spiritual, and artistic legacy created during that millennium continued to shape human civilization long after the political framework had disappeared. The ideas, methods, and values that animated Byzantine civilization found new expressions in diverse contexts, from libraries and legal codes to churches and mosques. The story of Byzantium never truly ended. It merely transformed, its cultural treasures finding new custodians and expressions in societies across Europe, Russia, and the Middle East. And so, our journey into the past comes to a quiet close. If you're still awake with me, I hope this tale brought you a little peace. If you enjoyed our time together, a gentle like lets me know. And subscribing means you'll never miss the next calm adventure. If you know someone who might need a little comfort tonight, feel free to share this story with them. Thank you, truly, for being here. Until next time, I wish you the sweetest dreams.